$1 million devastation. Erin Bates and Chad Paine's $3 million home destroyed in massive fire. It was a quiet Tennessee morning. The kind of morning that made life feel simple, safe, and steady. The Paine family home stood tall under a sky brushed with gold. Every corner of it whispered love. The piano near the window, the children's laughter echoing through the open halls, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. For Erin Bates and Chad Paine, this wasn't just a house. It was their dream, built with patience, prayers, and years of hard work. It was more than wood and glass. It was the heart of their family. The place where birthdays were celebrated, lullabies were sung, and tears were comforted. Every wall carried a story. The living room still remembered the sound of Erin's piano. Gentle hymns played on quiet nights, notes floating softly through the air as her children fell asleep one by one. The walls of the nursery were covered in tiny handprints, a masterpiece made by little fingers that once held onto Erin's hands while learning to walk. Outside, the world looked peaceful. Chad's truck was parked neatly in the driveway. The kids' bikes lay scattered across the yard. A breeze brushed against the white curtains of the front porch, where Erin had once written songs about love, loss, and faith. It was one of those days that felt eternal, where time moved slower, where everything felt beautifully ordinary. Erin had spent the morning teaching Brooklyn a new song on the piano, her laughter spilling through the room. Chad had been outside fixing a fence post, glancing through the window every now and then, watching his wife, his heart full. The house was alive with warmth. The kitchen table was covered in crumbs from breakfast, a Bible open beside Erin's cup of tea. The scent of home, pancakes, coffee, and comfort still lingered. It was nothing grand, yet to them it was everything. As the sun began to set, the house glowed with the golden color of evening, light resting on the photos that told the story of their life together. The day was ending slowly, beautifully, quietly. No one knew that it would be the last evening this house would ever see. In that moment, Erin stood by the window, her fingers tracing the glass as she watched the sky burn into orange. She smiled faintly, unaware of how the same glow would soon return, not from the sunset, but from flames that would consume everything she'd ever built. The night was calm, almost too calm. The trees outside stood still, the world holding its breath. The Paine home, their dream home, looked untouchable, wrapped in peace and grace. But somewhere deep in the silence, fate was already stirring. The house that once held every memory was only hours away from becoming a memory itself. The warmth that had filled their lives would soon turn into something they never imagined. A fire so fierce, so unforgiving, that it would test not only what they had built, but what they believed. The night had fallen softly over Tennessee. The stars hung still in the quiet sky, and the Paine home rested in silence. Inside, the lights were dim. The children were asleep, their small breaths rising and falling in rhythm. Erin and Chad were finally resting too, the house peaceful, as if it had exhaled after a long, beautiful day. Everything was still. Everything was safe. Until it wasn't. It began as a faint, distant crackle, the kind of sound that could have been mistaken for rain tapping against the roof. But there was no rain. Only heat. Only a soft hiss that slowly grew louder. In the corner of the living room, where the fireplace had gone quiet hours earlier, a tiny spark had caught something it wasn't meant to. A small thread of flame began to crawl along the edge of the hearth, tasting the air, reaching upward, alive, hungry. At first, the house didn't notice. The photos on the wall still smiled. The piano still stood proudly by the window. The scent of coffee from the morning still clung to the air. But the flame was growing faster, brighter, angrier. Within minutes, the soft orange glow became a roar. Curtains caught. Then the rug. Then the wooden beams that had held this home together since the day it was built. The air filled with smoke, thick, black, suffocating. Upstairs, Erin stirred. Something felt wrong. It wasn't a sound at first, it was a feeling. A heaviness in the air. A sharpness in her throat. She opened her eyes. The room was dim but not dark. The light flickering through the doorway wasn't moonlight. It was fire. She gasped, leaping out of bed. Her voice broke through the silence, one word, desperate and trembling. Chad. He was already up, eyes wide, heart racing. There was no time to think. Only to act. They ran to the children's rooms, choking on smoke, stumbling through the hall as the house they had loved began to crumble around them. The sound of wood cracking was deafening, like the house was crying out. Erin's arm shook as she lifted Finley from her crib. Chad grabbed Carson, shouting for Brooklyn and Holland. The air was thick, every breath burning like fire inside their lungs. "Come on. Stay close to me." Chad's voice was raw, his eyes stinging from smoke. Downstairs, the fire had consumed the living room. The piano, Erin's piano, was already in flames, the same keys that once sang lullabies now swallowed by heat. Every step they took felt like walking through memory. The photos, the toys, the blankets, everything turning to ash. The front door seemed a world away. The fire was everywhere. The windows glowed red, glass cracking from the heat. Erin held her children close, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear anything else. Then a crash. Part of the ceiling gave way behind them. Sparks rained down, burning holes into the carpet. Chad threw his arm over Erin, shielding her as they pushed forward. Outside, the night was cold, cruelly calm against the chaos behind them. When they burst through the front door, gasping for air, the shock hit them all at once. They turned back and saw it. Their home, their dream, their years of work, every laughter and tear that ever echoed within those walls, now burning like a star too bright to look at. Erin fell to her knees. The children clung to her, crying, terrified. Chad stood frozen, helpless, his hands trembling as if trying to hold on to something that was already gone. The sound of sirens began to rise in the distance, faint, then closer, then all around them. But it was too late. The flames had already claimed what mattered most to them, except for what stood before the fire now. Their family, alive but broken. Erin's eyes filled with tears as she whispered through the smoke, "It's all gone." Chad knelt beside her, his voice breaking. "No, it's not. We still have each other. That's all we need." Behind them, the fire roared louder, a cruel symphony of loss and survival. The piano's last note faded into the sound of collapsing wood and crying wind. In that moment, as the house fell into itself, the night sky filled with sparks, like tiny fleeting memories rising into the dark. And somewhere in that darkness, faith began to whisper again, that maybe somehow, even from ashes, a new song could begin. The fire was gone by sunrise. What had once been a bright, proud home now stood in silence, a blackened shell under the pale Tennessee sky. The wind moved through the ruins, lifting thin streams of smoke that rose slowly into the morning light. Didn't look real. It looked like a dream someone should have woken up from. The Paine family arrived just as the first rays of sunlight touched what was left of their driveway. The air still smelled of smoke, bitter, heavy, unforgettable. Ash covered the ground like snow. The grass was gray. The trees that surrounded the home were burned on one side, their branches pointing toward what used to be the heart of everything. Erin stood still for a long time, unable to move closer. Her shoes sank into the damp, ashy ground. Every step forward felt like walking deeper into a memory that didn't belong to her anymore. The front door, or what was left of it, hung sideways. The porch had collapsed. The windows were nothing but jagged outlines. And inside, where laughter once filled the air, there was only silence. She could still see it in her mind, the walls, the light, the piano by the window. Now there was only twisted metal, charred wood, and the faint reflection of flames in the broken glass. Chad stood behind her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes red and hollow. He tried to stay strong for her, for the children, but his strength felt thin, fragile. Behind them, the kids stood in a small group, huddled under blankets given by the firefighters. Their faces were pale, quiet. No one cried anymore. It was as if the tears had already burned away with the fire. A firefighter walked past slowly, his boots crunching over the ashes. He didn't say much. There was nothing to say. Only the sound of the wind filled the space where a home had once breathed. Erin knelt beside a pile of debris. Her hands, trembling, brushed away bits of ash until she found something small, the metal frame of a picture. It was burned on the edges, but inside somehow the image survived. A family portrait. Her, Chad, and the children smiling. Her lips quivered. She pressed the frame to her chest, closing her eyes. For a moment everything else disappeared, the smoke, the noise, the cold. Only that memory remained. Chad walked toward the piano's remains, or where it had once stood. All that was left was a curve of scorched wood and a few blackened keys scattered on the floor. He picked one up, holding it gently as if afraid it might shatter. That piano had been Erin's soul, the sound that filled every morning and every night. He turned toward her. She met his eyes, and no words passed between them. None were needed. The silence between them said everything: loss, disbelief, and the painful question of what now? The sun rose higher, its light spilling over the ruins. The warmth of the light felt cruel, almost mocking, shining over something that had once been beautiful. Neighbors began to gather quietly by the edge of the property. They didn't speak loudly. Some prayed under their breath. Others stood with tears in their eyes, remembering the family dinners, the laughter that used to echo across the fields. One of Erin's closest friends arrived and wrapped her arms around her without saying a word. Erin didn't move. She just leaned into the embrace, her shoulders shaking silently. Time moved slowly that morning. Minutes felt like hours. At one point, Erin sat on what used to be the porch steps, now nothing more than a few pieces of burned wood. She looked out over the ashes, whispering almost to herself, "Everything we built, everything we loved, it's gone." Chad sat beside her. His voice was quiet, cracked but steady. "Maybe not everything. We still have what matters most." Erin turned to him, her eyes red, her voice almost breaking. "But how do we start over, Chad? How do you rebuild a life from ashes?" He didn't answer. He just reached for her hand. And together they sat there, surrounded by loss, by silence, by the ghosts of their memories, holding on to the only thing the fire couldn't take: each other. Above them the smoke drifted slowly into the sky. A final goodbye from the home that had held their laughter, their dreams, and every piece of their love. And though the fire had taken everything visible, something unseen had survived. A quiet strength, hidden beneath the ashes, waiting for its moment to rise again. Days passed, but time didn't feel the same anymore. For Erin and Chad, mornings had become quieter, too quiet. The laughter that once filled the air was gone, replaced by the sound of wind moving through what used to be walls. The fire had taken their house, their belongings, their memories. But in the days that followed, they discovered something the flames couldn't touch: the kindness of others. The news of the tragedy spread through the small Tennessee community like a ripple. Within hours, neighbors began showing up at the Paine property, not to stare but to help. Some brought food, others blankets, others just open arms and hearts ready to do whatever they could. The family's church gathered in prayer. Volunteers came to clear debris, hands blackened by soot but filled with determination. Every shovelful of ash became a small act of love, strangers turning grief into strength. Erin watched them silently from a distance, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee someone had brought her. The smoke smell still clung to her clothes. Her eyes were swollen, but she stood tall. Somehow, standing there among the ashes, she began to understand something new about faith, that it wasn't only found in church pews or soft piano songs. Sometimes it was found in the hands of people who showed up when everything else was gone. Inside what used to be the living room, Chad and a few friends were clearing burned wood and fallen beams. Every creak of the broken floor echoed like a memory. He paused once, looking down at a spot where the piano used to sit. The floor there was scorched black, a mark that would never fade. He knelt down, his voice a whisper. "You gave this house a song, Erin. Maybe one day you'll give it another." Erin didn't answer right away. Her heart still felt heavy, too heavy to dream again. But later that evening, she sat down on a small step outside their temporary trailer, watching the sunset. In her lap was a notebook, edges burned from the fire but still usable. She opened it. The first few pages were charred, but there, halfway through, she found one that had survived, a song she had written months before. The title read, "Beauty from Ashes." Her hands trembled. She traced the words with her finger and whispered softly, "Maybe that's what this is." Over the next few weeks, life began to take on a fragile rhythm again. The children started smiling more, playing in the yard, chasing each other through the half-burned fence like before. They were too young to understand loss in the same way, but they understood love, and love was still everywhere. Chad worked tirelessly. He'd leave early, help rebuild what he could, and return at night covered in dust and soot. He never complained. Every nail he hammered, every board he lifted, felt like a promise that this wouldn't be the end. Erin, meanwhile, began journaling every day, not about what was gone, but about what remained. She wrote about faith, about motherhood, about starting over. Sometimes she cried while writing, sometimes she smiled. But every word she put down was a seed. Small pieces of healing planted in the ashes. On Sundays, their family sat together in church, the same pew they always had, though now the songs hit differently. When the congregation sang "Great is Thy Faithfulness," Erin couldn't stop the tears. But they weren't tears of loss anymore. They were tears of gratitude, for survival, for grace, for the strength to keep believing. One evening, a soft rain began to fall, the first since the fire. Erin stepped outside barefoot, feeling the cool drops on her skin. The ash beneath her feet turned dark and muddy, but for the first time, she didn't see it as ruin. She saw it as renewal. The sound of rain on the burned wood was gentle, rhythmic, almost like music. She closed her eyes, whispering quietly, "Maybe the house needed to burn for us to learn what home really means." And somewhere inside that broken, empty lot, between the silence and the rain, she felt it again. Hope. Small, fragile, but real. It didn't roar like the fire. It flickered softly, like the first light of dawn after a long night. The pain was still there, yes. The loss was still sharp. But beneath it all, something stronger was beginning to rise. Something unburnable. A family. Their faith. And a love that even fire couldn't destroy. The land where the Paine family's home once stood had grown quiet again. The ashes had settled, the smell of smoke faded, but something invisible lingered. A memory of everything that once was, and the promise of what could still be. Months had passed since the fire. The seasons had changed. Where there had once been blackened ruin, small signs of life began to appear. Green grass pushing through the gray soil, wildflowers blooming near the driveway that still bore the burn marks of that terrible night. It wasn't just the earth healing. It was them. Every morning, Chad arrived early at the site, his hands rough, his boots covered in dust, but his heart steady. He had no blueprint, just determination. Piece by piece, he began rebuilding what the fire had taken. Wood replaced ash. Hope replaced silence. The sound of hammering echoed through the air like a heartbeat. And every afternoon, Erin came by with the children, carrying sandwiches, lemonade, and laughter. They'd sit on the tailgate of Chad's truck, watching him work, the golden Tennessee sunlight wrapping around them like a warm embrace. For the first time in a long time, Erin smiled, not out of habit, but because she finally felt it. She remembered the night the fire took everything. And now, watching the frame of their new home rise from the same ground, she realized something she hadn't before. The fire hadn't destroyed them. It had refined them. Inside the half-built structure, Chad wiped the sweat from his forehead and looked around. The wooden beams stood tall, reaching toward the sky like open arms. The smell of fresh-cut lumber replaced the memory of smoke. He paused by the spot where the living room would be, the same place their old piano once stood. He turned to Erin, who had just walked in, her fingers brushing across the new wood. "It feels different," she whispered. "But somehow it still feels like home." Chad smiled faintly. "Home isn't the walls, Erin. It's us. It's always been us." That evening, after the workers left, Erin sat on the steps of the unfinished porch. In her lap was that same burnt notebook she had found weeks ago, the one that had somehow survived the flames. She flipped it open to the song she had written long before the fire. The title still made her chest ache. Beauty from Ashes. The sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky with gold and rose. Erin began to hum softly, then to sing. Her voice was tired, cracked in places, but pure. The melody drifted through the half-built house, through the open beams and fresh air, filling the space where walls would someday stand. For a moment it was as if the house itself was listening. When Chad heard her voice, he stopped working and just stood there, watching her. The woman who had lost everything and still found the courage to sing again. Weeks turned into months. The new home began to take shape, not as a replica of the old one, but as something new, something reborn. Every room held a story. Every nail driven into the wall carried meaning. Neighbors kept coming to help. Friends brought supplies. Even strangers sent messages, donations, and prayers. The world had watched them lose everything. Now it watched them rise. On the day the final roof beam was set, the children ran across the yard barefoot, their laughter echoing through the valley again. The same sound that had once filled their old home. This time it sounded stronger. Erin stood in the doorway, her eyes wet with tears, her heart full. She whispered quietly. We made it, Chad. He turned to her, smiling. No, Erin. You did. That night, for the first time in so long, the Paine family gathered together inside their new home. The walls were unfinished, the floors still dusty, but it didn't matter. They spread out a picnic blanket in the middle of the living room, surrounded by the smell of fresh wood and candlelight. Erin placed a small framed photo on the floor, the one she had pulled from the ashes that terrible morning. The edges were still burned, but the smiles in the picture had survived. They held hands, bowed their heads, and prayed. Not for more things, not for wealth or comfort, but for gratitude, for survival, for each other, for faith that had never truly burned away. As they finished praying, Erin looked up, her eyes catching the soft flicker of the candles. The light reflected in the windows, and for a brief moment, it almost looked like fire again. But this time it wasn't destruction. It was warmth. It was home. It was love reborn. The night grew quiet around them, but inside there was music again. Not from a piano, but from the simple rhythm of hearts that refused to give up. The morning sunlight spilled gently across the freshly painted walls of the new Paine home. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a testament, a proof of resilience, faith, and love that fire could never destroy. Erin stood at the doorway looking out across the yard. The grass had grown back, the flowers bloomed brighter than before, and the trees, though scarred, reached proudly toward the sky. For a moment, she closed her eyes, breathing in the familiar scent of home. Wood, fresh paint, and the faint hint of flowers. It smelled like life, like survival, like hope. Chad stepped beside her, carrying a box of photos, carefully protected in bubble wrap. Ready? He asked softly. As ready as we'll ever be, Erin replied, her voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and reverence. The children ran through the open hallways, their laughter filling every corner. Carson and Brooklyn explored their new bedrooms, calling out to each other. Finley toddled behind Erin, clutching her hand, looking around with wide, curious eyes. Every room was empty, yet full, empty of furniture, but full of possibilities. Empty of memories, yet full of new ones waiting to be made. Erin carried her notebook into the living room. She had waited for this day for months, the day she could finally play again. The old piano, replaced with a new one, gleamed softly in the morning sun. Erin ran her fingers across the keys. The notes felt strange at first, but then they found her again. A melody emerged, soft, delicate, and emotional. The children gathered around, listening. Chad stood in the doorway, tears glistening in his eyes. For the first time since the fire, the house sounded like home again. It's perfect, Chad whispered, his voice catching. Erin smiled, tears running down her cheeks. It's not the house, Chad. It's us, and we're back. Later that afternoon, the family gathered outside for their first meal in the new backyard. The sun shone warmly, birds chirped, and a gentle breeze rustled the trees. Erin set down plates while Chad lit a small fire pit for warmth and comfort. They ate, laughed, and shared stories, some old, some new, all precious. The neighbors stopped by, carrying casseroles and fresh bread. Children ran together, playing like nothing had ever happened. Every smile felt like a victory. Every laugh felt like a hymn. We survived, Erin said softly to Chad, watching their children chase each other. And we're stronger for it. Chad wrapped his arm around her. No fire can ever take what we carry inside. Nothing. Ever. As the sun began to set, Erin returned to the piano. The notes rose, soft and luminous, filling the home with life. Outside, the sky turned pink and gold. The smoke of the old fire was long gone, replaced by the gentle haze of evening. And in that moment, surrounded by her family, Erin realized something she hadn't before. The fire had taken a house, yes, but it had given them something more, the knowledge that they could endure anything. That love could survive any disaster. That faith, no matter how tested, would always guide them home. The camera lingers on the family, the children laughing, Chad smiling at Erin, the home glowing softly in the sunset. The piano continues to play, a song of resilience, healing, and a life reborn from ashes. Home, Erin whispers, isn't what's behind walls. It's what's inside our hearts. And in that home, in that moment, the Paine family knew. They had not only survived, they had triumphed. Weeks had passed since the Paine family had moved into their new home. The house was no longer just walls and floors. It had become a sanctuary, a canvas for memories still waiting to be made. Every room carried a quiet sense of triumph, a reminder that even the darkest nights could end in light. Erin walked through the halls slowly, her fingers brushing the edges of door frames. She paused at the living room window and watched the children playing outside. Their laughter was raw and unrestrained, bouncing through the yard like the notes of a long-lost melody finally rediscovered. She remembered the fire, the way it had consumed everything in minutes, leaving only ashes and silence. But now, as sunlight poured across the polished floors, that memory no longer brought only pain. It brought perspective. "We are stronger than we thought," she whispered to herself, her hand pressed over her heart. Chad joined her, silent at first, watching the kids chase each other across the green yard. Then he took her hand in his. "Every day I thought about what we lost," he said softly, "but I never thought about what we'd gain. This family, this love, it's unshakable." They stood together for a moment, letting the quiet wrap around them like a gentle blanket. Later that afternoon, Erin sat at the piano again, writing a new song. This one wasn't about loss. It was about resilience. About mornings after nights of fire. About laughter that returned stronger than before. About hope. The children gathered around her feet, watching her fingers dance across the keys, mesmerized by the melody that seemed to rise directly from their shared experiences. Carson, curious and wide-eyed, asked, "Mom, will we always be okay?" Erin smiled, tears glinting in her eyes, and replied, "Yes, sweetie, because we have each other, and that's all we'll ever need." Evenings became a sacred ritual. The family would gather in the backyard, around the fire pit Chad had built after the fire. A symbolic gesture, a small flame that reminded them of endurance rather than destruction. They roasted marshmallows, told stories, and shared moments of quiet reflection. Each ember in the fire pit carried their memories, some painful, some joyful, but all necessary to remind them how far they had come. Neighbors and friends continued to check in. Their support, constant and unwavering, reminded Erin and Chad that love extended far beyond their walls. That community could rebuild hearts as well as homes. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Erin and Chad sat on the porch steps, hands intertwined, staring up at the sky. The stars were clear, glittering like tiny promises above the land they called home. "I never realized how much we could endure," Erin said softly. "It's because of you," Chad replied. "Because of us. Together, nothing can break us." A gentle breeze passed, rustling the leaves and carrying the faint scent of flowers from the newly planted garden. Erin closed her eyes and breathed deeply, letting the peace settle into her bones. She reflected on the fire, on the loss, on the ashes they had walked through. And now on this quiet night, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. "We didn't just survive," she whispered to the stars. "We grew. We became stronger. And we will keep growing." Chad leaned back, watching her, and then looked toward the home that now stood complete. The house was more than a structure. It was a symbol of endurance, of love, of faith. "It's perfect," he said. "No," Erin replied with a soft smile. "It's ours. That's what makes it perfect." As the camera pulls back, the family home glows warmly under the night sky. Inside, the laughter of children, the gentle melodies of the piano, and the whispers of love echo through the walls, stronger, deeper, more resilient than ever before. From the ashes of loss, the Paine family had discovered something unshakable. Their bond, their faith, their love, eternal, unbroken, and unstoppable. The sun rose slowly over the Paine family home. Its golden light kissed the freshly painted walls and illuminated the children playing in the yard, their laughter bright and free, carrying the echoes of triumph over tragedy. Inside, Erin sat at the piano, her fingers tracing the keys gently. The music flowed, soft and tender, filling every corner of the house with warmth. Chad leaned against the doorway, watching her, a quiet smile on his face. Their eyes met, and no words were needed. Every glance, every breath between them carried the weight of all they had endured. The fire had taken a home, yes. It had taken furniture, memories, and treasures. But it had not taken them. It had not taken their faith, their love, or their unbreakable bond as a family. The children gathered around Erin, their small hands reaching for the music, their voices joining in her song. Carson, Brooklyn, and Finley sang softly, their innocence and joy shining brighter than any sorrow could ever dim. Erin's voice trembled with emotion as she continued to play. She looked around at her family, at Chad steady and strong, at her children laughing and safe, at the home they had rebuilt room by room together, and she realized something profound. The fire had been terrifying, heartbreaking, devastating, but it had also revealed something more beautiful than any house could hold. It had revealed them, their courage, their unity, their unwavering love. That evening the family sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cool autumn breeze. The sky above glowed with shades of pink, orange and purple, and the stars began to twinkle faintly. They held hands, each grasp a silent promise, to protect one another, to cherish one another, to never take a single day for granted. Erin whispered, her voice soft but full of conviction. "We can lose a house, but we'll never lose this. This is what makes a home. Our hearts." Chad squeezed her hand gently, looking at their children running and playing in the yard. "And that, Erin, is the strongest thing of all." The camera panned slowly across the home, the walls they had rebuilt, the yard that now bloomed with new life, and the family gathered together, glowing in the soft evening light. Memories of the fire lingered, yes, shadows of fear and loss, but they no longer defined the family. Instead, they had become a testament, a reminder that from ashes, something stronger, more beautiful and more enduring could rise. Erin returned to the piano one last time that evening. She played a melody that was soft, healing and eternal. It was a song of hope, a song of faith, a song of love that could not be consumed. The children leaned on her, listening, feeling, and learning that life's deepest lessons often came from the hardest trials. And in that home, in that moment, they understood something that fire could never destroy. Love is stronger than loss. Family is stronger than fear. And hope, even in the darkest hour, always survives. As night fell, the Paine family gathered together in a quiet embrace. The wind rustled softly through the trees, carrying the scent of flowers and the whispers of resilience. Erin looked at Chad, the children, and the home they had rebuilt together. Her eyes glistened with tears, not of sorrow but of overwhelming gratitude. "We are home," she whispered, "and we always will be." The camera pulls back slowly, showing the house glowing warmly under the starry sky, a beacon of survival, love, and unbreakable faith. From the ashes they had not only rebuilt a home, they had forged a legacy of love that would last a lifetime.